All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. We keep doing this. I love it. Anyway, I'm really excited today because we have Sean Grigsby on the show. Hi, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Sean has the most amazingly high concept novel like ever. I literally got on the phone with my friend today, and I said, Janice, I have this author on the show today, and you don't know him, but you are going to, because I'm going to tell you what his book is about, and you're going to want to read it right away. And you're right. I was like, it's about firefighters versus dragons. And she was like, I need this book. So hopefully people will come and listen to the show right up to that point, and then I'll be like, actually, before I listen to the rest, I got to go read the book.
Right. Yeah. Order it while you're watching the interview.
That's right.
It's one of those things that you tell people and they say, why has no one ever done this before? Why haven't they thought about this? And I have absolutely no idea, but I'm glad I snatched it up. And thankfully, I'm a firefighter, so I can put a little bit of the realism with the fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, in fact, that's one of the things that makes it so incredibly compelling, not just as a fiction concept, but as a book that you'd want to go out and immediately read, is to say, in fact, that this is not just somebody speculating about firefighting.
Right. Right. And a lot of the firefighter books that are out there, even in the realm of science fiction and fantasy, are very romance or erotica leaning. And they have the shirtless firefighters on the cover. Actually, today I was considering posting a fake cover for the sequel, which is called Ash Kickers, of me shirtless in my turnouts. I said, I don't know if I should do that. I mean, I'm not claiming to be the most professional of authors out there, but I thought that may be a touch too much. So I decided against it.
Oh, that's funny. You know, it's funny, though, because I know exactly what you're talking about. It hadn't occurred to me, but the minute you mentioned it, I'm like, I have seen this. Mm-hmm.
There are a lot. I even would search on Twitter just to see if people were talking about the book. And so I type in Firefighter Dragon in the Twitter search, and everything that popped up would be these books about firefighters who could turn into dragons when they weren't sweeping women off their feet.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, I had an agent who I didn't sign with, but I had told them about the idea. And she said, ooh, what if it was a firefighter who could turn into a dragon? But obviously that idea has been beaten to death. So no shirtless firefighters are in. Well, let me think about that. Yeah, I don't think there are any shirtless firefighters in Smoke Eaters or Ash Kickers. So.
We will come in advised that there are possibly no shirtless firefighters.
Possibly. if that's your thing, yes, there are.
The problem with firefighters being shirtless, of course, is that one assumes they need some kind of protection from fire.
Right.
But, you know,
But if they're dragons, they can handle the fire. They don't need those cumbersome coats.
Now I'm just trying to understand how the dragons ended up with shirts on. I'm so confused. This is what happens when you show up late.
I told you I go off on tangents. I warned you.
It's all good. So how long have you been a firefighter, Sean?
I have been a firefighter for 8 years, professionally. I never did the volunteer thing. I thought about it, but thankfully I got to be paid to do it full time. And I was with a small town fire department here in Arkansas before I came to Little Rock and joined the fire department here.
Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm vested in the retirement system, so that's
even
that's
better.
Yeah, even better. Which is good because, to be honest, I'd become a full-time writer in a heartbeat. People ask me, would you still be a firefighter and continue writing? I said, if I could just write full-time, I totally would. So
well, it's safer in many ways.
Yeah, well, depending. Yes.
Depending, right? Okay, sure. I guess on who you make angry on the internet or something.
Yeah. or meet some strange people at a convention. Actually, at Worldcon, it was strange. I was talking to Spencer German Ellsworth, and this woman came up, and she had these very sharp claws, and she was wearing a mask, and we didn't know what the hell was going on. So yeah, I could see being a writer being more dangerous than a firefighter sometimes. Because we could firefighters could just call the cops, and they'll be there in 2 seconds. But as a writer, you're out there on your own.
All right. That's right. You don't have backup. Okay, so
I somehow didn't realize that smoke inhalation was a writer hazard. Wow, that's scary now.
Well, it depends, I guess, on the writer. Anybody who's a smoker is definitely into the smoke inhalation. So
yes,
and we'll see.
But that's what smoke eaters actually. You bring up a good point. That for those who don't know, smoke eaters in the book have the ability to breathe dragon smoke without it killing them. They can breathe it just as easily as you and I can breathe air. And that's kind of what separates them from regular folk. They can go in and fight these dragons where others can't.
Wow. So tell us about how this concept was born in your mind.
Sure. I was in Fire Academy for the second time. I had mentioned I was at a smaller city fire department, and coming to the big city, they make you go through the academy again. And I was really bored because I'd been through this before. And of course, my writer mind's always working, always absorbing and coming up with ideas. And I was just sitting in the middle of class, and it popped in my head: firefighters versus dragons. One of the instructors was talking about how firefighters are basically modern day knights.
Oh, neat.
And that's where the idea kind of came from. And I also was thinking, this is my second time having to go through all this stuff. How would it be for someone who had a full career behind them? Someone in their late 50s to 60s who are about to be done and then have to go into a new career all over again. And so that's where the idea for making Cole Brannigan an near retiree. He's ready to pack it up and go home and spend time with his wife when he discovers he's a smoke eater. Wow.
Okay. So interesting. So tell us a bit about Cole Brannigan then.
Cole Brannigan, it's his last fire call. His team goes in, everything's running smoothly until he discovers that there's a dragon inside the building. I actually named Cole. I thought, Cole, that's kind of fire related, and it kind of sounded good with Brannigan. Brannigan, I actually got from Francis Brannigan, who is a famous fire instructor. He's since passed away a while ago, and he wrote the book, many of them actually, on building construction. One of his famous quotes is for firefighters is to know the enemy, and the structure, the building, is your enemy, which is very true. Many firefighter deaths are not caused by smoke inhalation or burns or steam burns or things like that. It's actually building collapse because, they don't see the warning signs of imminent danger and the building losing its structural integrity. And it's funny because his family reached out to me and out of the blue on Facebook and said, "Hey, we read your book. Did you name this guy after our grandfather?"
Oh, cool.
And at first I said, "Well, don't sue me." But yes, I did. I did actually name him after, and they were actually some of his grandchildren write science fiction themselves and are published. Yeah. Their names escape me right now, but I thought that was really cool.
How cool is that? Yeah. What a rewarding experience that must be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Cole Brannigan is a no nonsense. He doesn't put up with a lot. Yeah. And he kind of does his own thing. And some people who read the book say that he doesn't read much like a 60-year-old man. He reads more like a loose cannon 25-year-old. And to those people, I wish I could tell them, it's like, well, you probably don't know many firefighters. Because,
okay.
We have our professional persona we put on, you know, for the public. But inside the firehouse, if you've ever watched Rescue Me or shows like that, that's how firefighters act.
Huh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that is really interesting. So there's probably like a whole, I mean, probably, surely there is an entire like firefighter culture and
Absolutely. They call it the brotherhood. I mean, obviously, women are part of that as well. But it is a family. And with any family, many of us don't get along as well as we do with others. But yeah, there is a definite culture that's been around for back since the Revolutionary days. And I said it in Ohio because the first professional fire department was started in Ohio. And plus, and I've told this to Paul when he interviewed me about the book. My agent was from Ohio and had been wanting a book that took place in Ohio for a while. I said, well, I got you. It all fits together. And it's funny. My agent told me he's very editorial, which I love. He used to be an editor for Tor. And he said, you know, there's a lot of swear words in this book. And I said, well, you just read Daughters of Forgotten Light and you're saying this one has a lot of swear words, but okay. Let's take a look and I'll trim. So for anybody who thinks there's a lot of swear words in my books, trust me, before my agent got a hold of them, there was a whole lot more.
I actually have been in the position of having to tone down swear words in a story before, so I relate.
Right.
That's pretty funny.
And you know, it's the culture. In dangerous, you know, soldiers, police, EMS. You know, sometimes a 4-letter word says it better than a whole sentence. So
yeah. Well, yeah, no, I agree with that, and having your characters' voices be authentic is really important.
Definitely.
So, but I mean, obviously, there's a way of doing that without overwhelming your readers.
Right. You don't want to offend people or take them out of the story and just, you know, like Eddie Murphy said in his stand-up, you can't do a whole show with just curse words. But you know, keeping it real without taking people out of the story, because, you know, nothing too jarring.
Yeah.
But that's finding that balance is the difficult part.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. So, okay. So, I'm actually fascinated by what you've chosen to do, because this is a real world scenario, and at the same time it's very fantastical on several different parameters.
Right.
And so I'd love to have you tell us a bit about that and how that works for you.
Sure. And you know, a lot of people who've read the book have actually called it urban fantasy, which I had no intention of doing that whatsoever. It was just one of those things where I love both science fiction and fantasy equally. But I find I lean a little bit more toward the science fiction area. But I don't do the hard science fiction. You know, I don't give all the hard facts. So I really wanted to mix things up. And also I knew that it would be a whole lot more fun, for one, but a whole lot easier on my characters if this took place in the future, because then they could have the technology to fight the dragons. To me, it felt it would be a little boring if all they had was, you know, a 50 caliber gun, you know, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do more fun laser swords, lasers, foam. You know, what book have you ever seen that used foam against dragon fire?
Foam punk.
Foam punk. Hey, there you go. Paul just invented it. Yeah. And you know, so I did want to blend the realism of firefighting and really just use it as a huge metaphor, especially PTSD with the character of Deshaun and what he went through and experiencing that. And also, firefighters have a high rate of cancer because of all the toxins they encounter.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really wanted to blend that modern day realism with the more fantastical and futuristic aspects as well.
Yeah. So yeah, it's fascinating. When I'm talking about, so for folks who haven't read the book, we obviously have the dragons because they're part of the core concept.
Right.
But we also have the concept of the smoke eaters, which is a magical power possessed by humans. And we also have wraiths.
Right.
And those have very specific effects. So can you tell us a little bit about that, all the magical things?
With the wraiths, it was just something I saw in my head before I even began the book. And with me, if I see it very clearly and nothing inside is telling me, no, you don't want to do that, I go for it. Worst case scenario, my agent or an editor would say, you know, cut that. But it just built with the wraiths. And I saw this ashen landscape and this very terrifying ghost floating across the wastes. And it just built from there. And it worked out to where that was an aspect that drew dragons to certain areas. And it kind of built with the whole mythos of these dragons to where if they kill someone, they create a wraith. And the wraith's job is to not only attract other dragons to the area so they could possibly mate and, you know, lay dragon eggs, but also to stick around and protect those eggs from any predators or, you know, people who want to destroy them while they're gone. Yeah. And then I tied in the whole, because they're made of electricity, kind of, sort of. So you have these wraith trapping guns that Canada invents. And I play with this a whole lot more in the sequel. The wraiths are very important in the sequel, especially because, spoiler alert, the sequel features not only dragons, wraiths, but also a phoenix.
Oh, nice.
Oh, my.
I think I saw that in the book description. So it's not a spoiler.
Oh, well, that's true. Well, you follow me on Facebook, but yeah, that there's going to be a phoenix, and it really worked out very well. And with the smoke eaters, I love. I'm not going to lie. Skyrim was a big influence on me on writing smoke eaters, and I love the whole idea of Dovahkiin, and they have the soul of a dragon, and that's how they can fight these dragons, because they're basically made of the same stuff almost. And I like that idea. And throughout the series, hopefully it'll become a series, at least it's 2 books so far, I can kind of explore the history of, you know, how these smoke eaters got this dragon DNA inside them to where they can withstand heat and smoke.
Yeah, that's very mysterious.
Which I touch on a little bit, but you know, I don't want to give everything away.
Wow, there's so much here.
Yeah.
So we get, okay, so when the description is just dragons versus firefighters, you know, it's a little vague. I mean, we could just be like, okay, cage match.
Right.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit about the plot and how the plot develops so that we have a bit more sense of the meat of what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cole, as I mentioned, has this fire call. His team is killed by the dragons. He goes in, he loses his air mask as he's trying to rescue his crew. And that's when he breathes in the smoke and then finds that it doesn't affect him negatively. And once the smoke eaters arrive on scene to take care of this dragon, they see that he's in the middle of this and isn't dying. And so they know, oh, he's a smoke eater. So they take him against his will back to Smoke Eater's headquarters and tell him that he's introduced to Chief Donahue, who's over the Smoke Eaters. And he's like, look, we don't have enough Smoke Eaters to fight the dragons. So we find whoever we can and enlist them. Not so much forced, but pretty much. And so he's faced with this decision now because he was going to retire and he was done with the fire service and everything. And now he finds out that he has this ability he was born with and just found out. And the dragons are a huge problem. Society is trying to move along. It's not totally post-apocalyptic, but it's close enough. And he knows that having been a firefighter for almost 30 years, he feels that inner calling to do this because he was literally born to do it. And so there's also the aspect of the mayor of the city of Parthenon City, who is no good. And you know that from the beginning, but you can't really put your finger on why.
Right.
And Brannigan doesn't trust him from go. And there's all of these strange things happening to where dragons are appearing more and more frequently. And there's white fire and wraiths appearing in these areas. So he thinks something's up. And that's where it starts from there. Oh,
cool. So he's going to have to like get to the bottom of the mystery of why.
Oh, yeah. I love putting mystery aspects in all of my books. Just because to me, well, it's interesting to me, but I think that's something that everybody can appreciate and enjoy. And it keeps people, I hope, glued to the book because they want to find out what happens.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always that. Is he going to figure it out?
Right.
So that's awesome. Okay. So, I'm going to ask you whether you had any particular individual experiences that you put from your own life into the book.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us about some of that.
Yeah. A lot of the camaraderie that I put in the book is stuff that I've experienced over the years. A lot of things I've heard from different people I've put in the book. The one line I can remember at the moment is, that's not worth 2 dead flies. And that I never understood what that that meant, but I thought it was funny. And it was one of those kind of lines that I just had to put in the book. But there's a scene in Smoke Eaters where they arrive at a house thinking they're going to have to fight a dragon, and then finding out that this woman living there overreacted because it was really just a turtle trapped in her laundry room. And that's the sort of things that we deal with on a frequent basis, to where people call 911 for the strangest and most non-emergency related things. And I wanted to put that kind of thing in the book as well.
Yeah, that's funny.
Which is good. A lot of firefighters who've read the book, thankfully, have said, "Oh yeah, this is totally the humor of the firehouse." I said, "I'm okay, good," because that was one of the aspects I was hoping I got right, and then I didn't just twist with my own perception. But they totally think it rings true.
That's really cool. And I'm sure there are a lot of technical details that you were able to bring as well.
Yeah, and because I consider the book science fiction personally, and I know that not every science fiction book has to have complete elements of factual science, obviously, but I wanted to do that with this. And fire science is something that I know about and I've been taught, so I really didn't have to do a lot of research there, because I've been through it already twice through Fire Academy. Now I went back and looked at the books to make sure that what I remembered was actually what they taught us and what's true. Fire tetrahedron. I took a class called The Art of Reading Smoke, and that class talked about volume, velocity, density, color. And a lot of times the human eye is drawn immediately to flame because not only is there light, but also movement. And it's just something natural. You could stand around a campfire and that you want to stand there and look at it all night. But with a structure fire, smoke actually tells you a whole lot more about what the fire is going to do than the actual flames. And so I put a little bit of that in there.
So can you tell me again the name of the class? Because I want to write it down. Yeah,
sure. It's called The Art of Reading Smoke. And his last name's Dodson. He came up with the course. He goes all over the country teaching this.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And it's one of those things that you don't think about. A lot of times smoke is just considered a byproduct of the fire, and that the fire is the enemy, but the smoke, like I said, tells you a whole lot more about what it's doing, and what it's about to do. Especially the color and the volume of it. Very thick black smoke signifies that you're about to have flashover. And what flashover is where everything inside the structure reaches its ignition temperature at the same time. And that means you too, if you're inside. And that's the time that you want to do defensive operations. So it's no longer about saving that structure, but just getting the thing out, surround it and drown it.
Wow. Wow. That is cool.
I think so.
I'm like writing this down and I'm going, I'm going to have to talk to Sean after about some stuff.
When fellow authors find out I'm a firefighter, I get swamped with fire questions. It's like, okay, if this happens, what will it sound like? And things like, and a lot of times I'm like, I don't know. I haven't been in that situation, but I can guess, and I'll guess for you. But take that with a grain of salt. I've never encountered, an entire town going up in flames or anything crazy like that, but I like it. I feel useful to my author community.
There's not too many author/firefighters. I can think of one other offhand.
Scott Lynch.
Yep.
I think he's actually stopped being a volunteer.
Yeah, I don't think he volunteers in Massachusetts. He did when he lived in Wisconsin, but
yeah.
But yeah, that's the only other person I can ever think of that crosses that divide like you do.
Right, me too. And I think someone tagged him for my tour article about a firefighter's guide to fighting dragons, and that was one of the coolest things. I've actually gotten to know Scott in the last few months. Very nice. It was actually I fanboy all the time, but that was one of the coolest days when he followed me back on Twitter. I said, this is the greatest day of my life. Because I loved the Gentleman Bastard series. I've only read the first two. I haven't read, I believe there's two more. The Thorn of Emberlane, I think, was the most recent. But yeah, that was awesome.
That's great. All right. That's super cool. Well, let's see.
Did you want to talk about Daughters of Forgotten Light?
We can totally do that one. I wanted to do actually. You and I had the same instinct at the same moment, but my instinct says I need to ask Paul and Che if they have any questions about this particular world before we move on to another one.
Sure.
Che, you can go first.
Oh, mine is just stupid because it's like you have to have seen Reign of Fire, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes, I knew it. I knew it.
Well, when I kind of pitched it, I called it Reign of Fire meets Backdraft.
Nice.
Yeah. And actually, because people don't know. I snoop on Twitter all the time. I don't know if other authors do this, but I look and see what people are saying about my book. And this one guy who hadn't read the book yet, but people were talking about it, and he said, "This just kind of sounds like Reign of Fire all over again." And I got on there. I said, "Well, yeah, it kind of is. It was an inspiration." And he's like, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure it's great." You know. So watch what you say about people's books out there, because the authors are probably watching. But but actually, my fire captain gives me grief all the time. He's like, "Oh, it's just basically Reign of Fire," and thankfully, people who've read it said that it's like a better Reign of Fire. So that's good.
I really like that movie, but it was also really stupid.
Right.
But it's like, but it was like the only like awesome dragon movie to come out for like forever. So
right.
It's the dragon movie you're stuck with, and also like it's Matthew McConaughey's greatest role ever. I will die on that hill.
Forget Dallas Buyers Club. Reign of Fire.
I will die on that hill.
Well,
he was so cool. I didn't recognize him.
Yeah,
and it blew my mind. Okay, so
that's no, I loved Reign of Fire. I had the video game. I loved driving around in the little ATV thing and shooting at the dragons and stuff. Yeah, that was totally an inspiration. And I was in talks with the producer about turning Smoke Eaters into a movie. That fell through, but who knows? Maybe sometime in the future. And then you can have a new dragon movie.
Do Netflix.
Long form.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
That might be. Yeah, we'll see. Any producers out there? The film rights are open.
Good to know. So, okay. So, when does before we move on, when does Ash Kickers come out?
I just found out the other day, June 4th is when it comes out. Yeah. I turned it in just before I left for WorldCon. It wasn't due till October. So I got that nailed. I was so worried that I wasn't going to meet the deadline, because you hear about that all the time. And this is the first time I had a deadline.
Sure.
For a novel anyway. And yeah. And beta readers have really enjoyed. Actually, Paul, if you want to read it, I'll send it your way.
Yes, please.
All right, done.
Bonus for you, Paul.
As long as you know it's very, very green and unedited. But the ending is really divisive among the beta readers, though.
Interesting.
But it sets up the third book, and I'm not ashamed to say that I did that because I'm trying to sell the third book. So
sure.
I liked it, and I couldn't have ended it any other way. Which actually, the ending to Daughters, actually most people like the ending to Daughters.
The ending to Daughters is awesome.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so let's utter the entire title of this book. Daughters
of Forgotten Light.
Daughters of Forgotten Light. And it's funny you mentioned that because many people have been calling it Daughters of the Forgotten Light. And I don't mind that as long as they read it and like it. But to set the record straight now, it's Daughters of. There is no the or the. It's just Daughters of Forgotten Light. And if you're asking me where I got that title, I was out running one day and I couldn't think of what to call this thing. And it just popped in my head and I said, sure, why not? And it kind of, rings in a way. It calls to mind Sons of Anarchy, which is another motorcycle gang media. And I don't know, it kind of worked.
Yeah.
And the women are forgotten. So I don't know. I liked it.
Yeah. Cool. So this is a very different world.
Yes.
So tell us about it, please.
Yes, sure. Okay, so this is in the far future. I never say what year it is, purposefully, but it's in the far future, and basically, the Earth has brought on a new ice age.
Wow.
Which is different. Obviously, science tells us that it's probably going to be the opposite end. But I kind of wanted to shake things up and do something different to where climate change does something, but it's still bad, but it's completely different. And the government has set up these Enviro shields to kind of keep the cold at bay. But they're not going to last forever. And also, the rest of the world wants this technology that the United Continent of North America has, which basically is Canada, America, and Mexico all as one. And because of such terrible things going on in the world, the government decides to give families the ability to sell their children either to the military, if they make the cut, and if they don't, and if they are women, to be sent to this prison city in space called Oubliette. Which, for those who love Labyrinth like I do, an oubliette is a place you stick someone you want to forget. Yep. And so this society has developed on Oubliette to where you have these motorcycle gangs who run things. There are 3 of them. There are the Daughters of Forgotten Light. There are the Onks Coalition and the Amazons, who are cannibals. And they have all of these people under them who are called dwellers, because all they do is just dwell there and work for whichever gang they happen to reside under. And what happens is a new shipment comes. There's a very fragile truce between the gangs. And when the shipment comes, it brings new supplies, new prisoners, and a baby. And that is something completely different, because there's an age range of women who get sent to this prison city in space. And so now they got to figure out what they're going to do, and also who's going to get the baby. And it may just be the cannibals.
Oh, boy. I can already tell there's a lot of conflict there.
Yes. It's very grindhouse, late 70s, early 80s. I call it grindhouse, but, or, you know, Escape from New York, The Warriors, that kind of better word for it than grindhouse or exploitation, because I did take a lot of inspiration from that genre, but I definitely wanted to leave out some of the more troublesome aspects of it as well. I kind of wanted to do a deconstructed version of that and give all the power to the women, and just, but still use everything good and cool about that sort of media.
So can you specify what it was that you wanted to leave behind or to leave out?
Yeah, I didn't like, with women in prison films, those are pretty much just softcore porn.
Oh, yeah.
With just, you know, cat fights and things like that, and very just surface level cheap thrills. And I didn't want to do that kind of thing. I really wanted these, you know, obviously these women to be real characters and real people, and who have bigger things to worry about than tearing each other's clothes off, or, you know, stupid stuff like that. And also, I wanted to include as much diversity as I could, not just because as window dressing, but because that's just reality. And I a lot of marginalized groups don't get a lot of representation. And so I made one of the characters mute. I don't want to spoil it, but Paul knows who this character, and there's a big reveal scene, but they all and they're also Muslim, and another character has Down syndrome. Other characters, it just covered the whole gamut, and I really wanted to be that, and to be more real, but also have a hell of a lot of fun shooting lasers and riding cyclone motorcycles across a glass city and cool stuff like that.
Everybody
it's funny.
Have fun shooting lasers and riding cyclone motorcycles.
Right.
Yeah.
That's funny. And I forget if I told Paul this, but my own mother, when I was telling her about this book, I forget if I just finished writing it or I was in the middle of writing it, but she said, "So all of the characters are women?" I said, "Yeah." I don't think it's going to get published. I think you should put some men in there. And so that was confusing to me because this was a woman, my mom, telling me this. And I was like, what? Of course, there are maybe 2 male characters in the entire book. One is, he maybe has 2 lines and he's just a side character. And the other is the friend to the senator who runs the shipping port. Well, he doesn't run it, but he runs the launch room that sends these women to Oubliette.
Uh-huh.
But other than that, every character's a woman.
That's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in some ways it makes sense.
Yeah. And I wanted to do that.
Got a system set up that would do that kind of sex-based sorting. Right.
And also just, you know, there's plenty of books where 99% of the characters are men, and it's not to where, you know, it's a world without women, you know, that kind of thing. They you know, just, they're just for whatever reason not brought into the story. And I said, well, if they can do that with men, why can't I do that with women? To where, you know, this is their story, and we don't we don't need any men in the story, kind of thing. So.
Yeah.
And it was really cool getting into these characters' heads. A lot of I put a lot of myself in Lena for some reason. I don't know if Paul because I know Paul's read it. I don't know if he sees that, but for whatever reason, I really got into Lena. It's there too.
She is very deeply described, and we really get stuff from her point of view and her thoughts. So yeah, I can see that.
Right. But I also added a little Snake Plissken. She was my version of Snake.
well, yeah. I mean, well, actually, I was also thinking of what's that movie? I was also thinking of the movie Doomsday.
Yes. And I never get a chance to use that as a comparison, but that's yes, Paul, definitely. I love Doomsday.
Cool. So what kinds of things, I mean, so clearly there aren't a lot of supplies. So that's, you know, just sort of basic hunger, thirst, that kind of, those kinds of needs are going to be major motivations for the characters. What else is going on in there?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you bring that up. They don't actually get regular food. They don't get, you know, chicken, beef, and that kind of thing. They actually, on Earth, they make this stuff they call manna. And it's got all of their nutritional needs in it, but it tastes like crap. And it nourishes them. It gives them enough water, enough fluid, enough nutrients, but that's about it. And that's actually where the cannibals, you know, start doing their thing, is that their leader actually was a cannibal on Earth. And kind of brought that to Oubliette. And that's where the truce comes in, to where you guys can have all the mana you want, but we get to kill all these other prisoners who show up and eat them. So it's pretty gruesome. It's pretty gruesome. A lot of stuff happens off scene because there's certain things I just cannot write. I get visceral on some things, but other things I don't know, maybe I'll grow past it, but I'm not big on violence against children. Even though it's implied in that book, but I could not just show it. I wanted it to be off screen, basically, which actually maybe makes it more of a gut punch because you don't get to see it. But I went off on a tangent there. So yeah. And so you got this truce, and nobody likes each other, except within the gangs. And even that kind of is, you know, tumultuous because they're basically in prison, and most of them are innocent. There's no reason for them to be treated this way, so they're angry. And so, if they ever do get back to Earth, they might not be so nice to the people who sent them away.
So I have actually a question that is linking together a couple of the things that you were talking about before. You're mentioning how Earth is in a new ice age and there's this tech issue. what is there a climate on Oubliette, or is it like an indoor building kind of situation?
That's a good question. It's actually, and nobody's asked me this, so I'm very excited to answer. And there's certain things that when people read it and I look at reviews and I go, well, they didn't mention so and so, but it's a fabricated atmosphere called the Veil. It's Oubliette's basically just floating out there in space. There is a hyperdrive gate to where the shipments go through the gate that's just outside of Earth's atmosphere, and it instantly transports them to the other end of the galaxy, basically. And it's actually described in the book like a snow globe or a dinner plate with a dish on top, or what are those things called? Or a dish cover, to where it's pretty much invisible until the shipment comes through and you can kind of see it statically rippling out green. And then it has this power system called the core that generates the air and also sanitizes human waste and that kind of thing, and creates all this stuff. Because the city of Oubliette was initially designed by these super rich people who knew that things were changing on Earth and they were going to get out. And so they had built this city in space, and they were going to use it until the government took it from them and then used it as basically a prison colony.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when I read that, I thought, okay, so just like Escape from New York, you turn Manhattan into a penal colony. Here, you take it's going to be a refuge into a penal colony. Although, wait, I shouldn't say something yet because that'd be spoilers for the plot.
Yeah,
I was about to say something bad, so no.
It's interesting that you would turn a something that was meant to be like your bunker and keep people out, and then you use it to keep people in. That's kind of cool.
Right. Which the government's done before. I mean, look at Australia. Australia began as a penal colony.
Absolutely.
And I give a little tip of the hat to that, because a term of endearment these women use on Oubliette is Sheila. Which, old Australian, which I lived in Australia for about 6 months. Never heard anybody call each other Sheila, but I was only 9, so
and it's not nice.
Yeah, that's true. Well, in the book though, it's a term of endearment. But yeah, many governments, but that just is one example, have turned something that was supposed to be, like you said, a refuge into separating and putting people away, which I never understood that logic. Like why certain governments do that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we could talk about that, but I think that's a topic for another time.
That'd take another 2 hours. A lot of that kind of thing trickles into my fiction, which I don't necessarily do on purpose, but it just kind of happens. And then when I see it happening, I go, screw it, let's just roll with it. This is my thing. I mean, with Smoke Eaters, you have a lot of my villains are politicians. Now that I think about it, you have the mayor who's doing things in Parthenon City, and he's using these droids. He wants to replace the firefighters and the police and everybody with droids, all the public services, and for nefarious purposes. And then with Daughters of Forgotten Light, you have the government doing population control, and Paul knows how that ends up for them. And my next book I'm actually working on, Ass Kickers is obviously done, but the next book I'm working on is called Robots Don't Cry. And it starts, at least, as a 1940s crime noir from the perspective of a robot detective. And it takes place in a city separated by a wall. One side is all robot. The other side is all human. Nobody crosses from one side to the other. And it's Upper and Lower Vomisa, which I'll tell you is basically Asimov backwards. It's not, it's not rocket science. So what starts with this is, so you have these robots and they work for the humans, and the humans stick to their own, except one day a dead human is found in the robot part of the city, and that starts it all down a very dark and twisty rabbit hole.
This is something you're currently working on that you have a schedule for?
I'm currently editing it. So it's done, being the first draft is done. And so I'm going through and kind of tweaking and making sure everything makes sense. And so I'll send that to my agent, and then we'll take it out on submission. So yeah, as of right now, we haven't sold it yet.
But sounds cool.
Thank you.
Sounds very cool.
I'm excited about it. And I got another one, but that's still too early. I always got.
It sounds like you're just bursting with projects. That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
It's always good to have a future plan, right?
Oh yeah, and it's always funny. I always worry if I'm going to get another idea, but always without fail, while I'm finishing up one novel, I'll get an idea for another one.
That's interesting. It sounds very familiar.
Yeah. It's like that last minute. Oh, boom! Here's an idea. Okay, cool. Oh, and speaking of robots, I actually just sold a short story to Amazing Stories,
nice.
that features the main character from Robots Don't Cry.
Okay,
so you get an early preview.
Well done.
Thank you. I met Ira, the editor at Worldcon, and we were on a panel together. It was he, me, and Cat Rambo, and a couple others. And afterward, he said, "Do you write short stories?" I said, "You bet I do."
Yeah.
I haven't had much success with them. Actually, Juliet, I think I was talking to you at the Codex breakfast.
Yeah.
About short stories. And because I've always just been better at novels. That's been my and I don't know why, but hey, this one worked out. So, because after I talked to him at Worldcon, I came home and wrote something up real quick and sent it to him. I said, fingers crossed, let's see and it worked. So
awesome. Well, congratulations. That's fantastic. And I hate to break it to you all, but it's 5 o'clock.
It is.
Oh, right.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I hope I did well and answered all your questions.
I think it was great. Is there anything anybody wants to sneak in before we stop the broadcast?
Favorite gang in the Warriors? Go.
The Griffs. Gramercy Griffs. I was gonna say the it was the all female gang. The Lizzies. Yeah, the Lizzies. I was gonna say that, but Todd A. Thompson convinced me that they weren't that great. so I had to reconsider. I think they're still cool. Actually, there's a movie out there. I never could get through it, but because it's got some stuff I don't like. But there's another movie out there called Switchblade Sisters, which is about an all women gang. It's one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite movies. I don't particularly. I thought it's got problems. That's the best way to talk about it. But other than that, yeah, I'd say Gramercy Griffs. But the baseball gang was awesome too, because you're just like, why are these guys walking around in makeup, wearing baseball uniforms and carrying bats and things like that? But hey, it's cool. Can you dig it?
Okay, well, I'm gonna get us wrapped up here for now, and come back on the show, Sean. We can talk about new books that you have when they come out and stuff like that, because we should totally do this again.
Absolutely.
We're going to meet next week. I do not have a topic lined up, but guess what? Trust me, there will be a topic before we come to next week. Sean, you're always welcome to come back and join us for our topic discussions, or if you want to hear, meet another author and ask them questions and stuff like that. That's always fun too. So
for sure.
I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Also, for all the time that you spent troubleshooting the technical aspects of this yesterday, which was exceedingly key, because if we hadn't been able to hear each other, that would have been a big problem.
Right.
Anyway,
we had to play Pictionary or something.
That's right. And it's hard to do that about books for an hour. You know what I'm saying? So, anyway, so thank you again for being here, and I'm going to stop the broadcast, and we can chat again on the other side.
I had a fantastic